Hello again, friends. It's October, and I have 3 questions I've come in for asking for a friend. We're going to switch it up a little bit this month, and rather than having a main theme that is obviously related to a particular competency, I'm just taking a smattering of questions, and I'll sort of just off the top of my head answer them and hope that some of my experiences will be of interest or use. So I love these questions. Number 1, what is the most difficult evaluation I've been involved with, and what did I learn? And I like the second half of that because when I was starting to think difficult, I've actually don't have any evaluations sort of filed, and boy, that was difficult. That was a gendered expression, wasn't it? Wonder what the etymology of that is. Anyway, let's be self-aware. I don't actually think of past experiences. I don't tend to categorize them as difficult or easy, but rather much more, what did I learn from that? And in the process of feeling like I've just done a face plant, I generally strive to switch as fast as I can to digging into what can I learn from this. So I can actually pull up quite a few, but technically speaking, the most difficult evaluations to do well, and according to my ethics, are when I've had very little to do with writing the request for proposal or the terms of reference for the evaluation. So there are evaluation questions, perhaps, that are doing a mix of impact evaluation, process evaluation, and maybe a bit of a developmental touch to it. And there's been no awareness of evaluability assessment, for example. So it's asking for everything, and it's not feasible to do that or appropriate to do that. And so it's a matter of working with an advisory group to come to the realization of what is actually feasible and best aligned with the intended use of this inquiry. And so that can be actually really confusing to an advisory group or to participants who are used to a very formulaic compliance to a question. And I'll just give a really simple example of how I facilitated awareness that a question was not going to generate useful information. I was asked to revamp a post-event evaluation form, and it asked for satisfaction with the length of the session. And so I posed the question, so if somebody is not satisfied with the length of the session, how will you know whether it was too short or too long? So sometimes little simple questions like that can sort of help a group who thinks that what they're asking is very simple, but in fact it is not going to be useful. And it would be simple just to comply with following through on that type of a question, but it might not make sense. Similarly, if a group is asking for evidence of outcomes or impact, and they have no evidence that something has been implemented, and they actually maybe not even have a theory for how, if you're asked, for example, to implement a strategy or a policy, they have no theory for how the existence of that strategy or policy would have contributed to any change that they may or may not be able to identify. So the contribution or attribution question. And so while that's technical language that might lose people, if you go at it directly, sort of facilitating a conversation for clarity is one of the most useful things I think that I have in my toolbox to offer a group in terms of learning and quick changes in design, not only for the evaluation, but actually for their program. The next question is, when an evaluation has one paying client, i.e. the commissioner, and multiple stakeholders, i.e. people who are intended to benefit from the program or who have who may potentially not be well served by the program, etc. Let's just say, how do you make sure that the final report, I'm just going to add and the process, doesn't reflect the values of the paying client only? What negotiation strategies have you found to be most effective in ensuring the voice and interpretation of marginalized stakeholders get equal prominence in the report? So my answer to that is way before the report, and ideally even before the commissioning, to have this is the governance and the management of the evaluation needs to be authentically inclusive. That's my aspiration. If you're just asking me, I'm not speaking for CES or anybody else, that it has to be that the funder is self-aware and humble about its own needs. And obviously, a lot of the time, the funder is also situated in the hierarchy. And so it needs to be responding to something that it doesn't have control over, but that it actually holds space and budget for additional inquiry, and that it is asking as a condition of participation of said marginalized group, whatever that might be, as a condition of participation, what would make this a safe and relevant use of your time and your engagement? And I would say also negotiating intellectual property right up front. And if you're talking about Indigenous rights, then there's also sovereignty and treaty rights and OCAP and governance of the data and data sovereignty, all of that to consider. And more, I think that also other communities will be claiming similar ownership of their information and data as a condition for them to participate. So yes, the report, but I would say the best way to make sure that the report is useful, and it's not always going to be a report, your product, is to actually think about it with the commissioning, the governance, and the management of the study in the first place. Is there a role for evaluation in providing direction rather than just assessment of complex problems? That is controversial. I almost don't have an answer to that because I think it's a both and yes, no, it depends, situational kind of a question. I think sometimes evaluation can be done in such a way that there is subject matter expertise. And as I said before, if the management, the commissioning, and the governance is inclusive enough, I think it can absolutely be part of the scope to ask the evaluator to facilitate some recommendations. And in fact, a lot of the times that was just a standard expectation. And I've been in processes almost like a fly on the wall where an evaluator has been validating potential recommendations. And the risk is that the set of recommendations at the end sometimes can almost risk reading like, yeah, no kidding, we could have actually facilitated this list of recommendations without even doing an evaluation, because it's so possible to interpret them as at the surface level of what we kind of figured, what we kind of wanted to do anyway, or what we kind of thought needed to be done. And so if those recommendations are taken and acted on without any in-depth reading, even of the report, let alone the raw data, then it really questions and undermines the utility, the value for money of having done the evaluation process, in my opinion. So I think that there is a time and place for arguing for an evaluation without any recommendations as part of the scope of the work. And I can also imagine times where it could be managed so that that's actually well done and very useful and appropriate. So thanks for that set of questions. I'm just going to pop this out there, maybe even without much of a blog with links as I intend to be doing. But what I would like to do is invite others to chip in, chime in, and maybe what I'll do is I'll follow up with another piece to summarize some of the other input that we got in response to these questions and this video. So I'm going to put this out with a Google form where you can go in and put your thoughts in, and then I'll go and summarize it and share out other answers to this if I get any, and if I get any response to this. Thanks.